Hi, I'm Dave Keel. Welcome to this Christian Business Insights podcast show where my goal is to provide you with practical, actionable ideas to help you create businesses and careers of excellence and at the same time multiply your influence for the kingdom. I have been a Christian in business for over 30 years, and I have personally and contractually consulted with over 500 different sales organizations. So in these podcasts, I combine the lessons that I have learned with an out-of-the-box experience and perspective on Christianity that you will find challenging. And we put that together to provide you with practical insights and ideas that you can use to live better and lead better. Hi, this is Dave. I got a special program today. We're going to be interviewing an expert in the area of AI as it relates to spiritual growth. I'm going to have a hard time putting those two words together. It's a whole new concept for me. But Drew Dickens is here, and I'm going to have him introduce himself, and then we're going to get into this topic and explore what we can learn about AI and spiritual growth. So, Drew, welcome. How about introducing yourself?
Dave, it's an honor, and thank you for having me this morning. My official introduction is a follower of Christ, cleverly disguised as a husband of one wife and father of two sons and grandfather of two grandsons, rather, not great
Hmm.
grandsons yet. So yeah, I was in seminary, went to Dallas Theological Seminary, and decided to pursue my doctorate after that, and have always been interested in the crossroads of theology and technology for the church. And so I decided to explore kind of this new emerging conversation around artificial intelligence around 6 years ago. This was pre-OpenAI, pre-ChatGPT. And so my dissertation was interesting because there really wasn't a lot in the field yet,
Hmm.
but a lot of fun working on that. And so I'm the host of Encountering Peace, which is a daily meditation on a verse of the day. And that's been a full-time passion of ours for coming up 10 years now.
Hmm.
And then also the AI and Spirituality podcast, which is the difficult one for you to wrap your head around.
Hmm.
And don't feel bad about that, by the way. You're not alone. This is really a brand new field for all of us, really.
Yeah. Well, I am having a hard time getting my head around that. I have never really thought about putting those two words together, so I've got a lot to learn today. So why don't you? Okay, so I'm a novice. I think most of my listeners are too when it comes to the idea of AI and spirituality. So how about a little primer? How about a couple of minutes on what on earth does AI have to do with spirituality?
Well, you know what's interesting because the timing of this is great. I actually sent out we've got about 300,000 listeners on the Encountering Peace podcast, and I love polling them periodically on different topics, and they're aware of my interest in AI. And I sent out a survey yesterday morning, and the response to it has been overwhelming about AI, and the vast majority of them sounds like a lot like your audience and you and most of us. Vast majority of them have never really, by their admission, explored AI, done much
Hmm.
with it,
Hmm.
gotten involved with it much.
Hmm.
But yet an equal percentage, and it's in the 70s, really felt like they needed to explore this
Hmm.
spiritually.
Hmm.
So I think your listeners are not alone in their curiosity and some fear, if we can be honest with each other. There's some anxiety, there's some hesitation
Hmm.
there, and
Hmm.
probably uh, uh, well-founded.
Hmm.
So the primer is that AI really began in World War II. We won't go back that far. Alan Turing is considered, I guess, the great grandfather of artificial intelligence, and has evolved and grown and morphed. I don't think it really showed up on a lot of people's radar until about 4 or 5 years ago with the advent of ChatGPT,
Hmm.
which is one of only about a dozen large language models. And AI at its most basic level is a next word generator. So the example I use when I speak is if I tell you I enjoy eating sandwiches, especially peanut butter and blank, generally 97% or so of the people fill that in with jelly, but
Mm-hmm.
it could be bananas or honey or all
Mm-hmm.
sorts of other things that I hear.
Mm-hmm.
So AI consumes everything ever written by humans, from Sumerian writings to today's Wall Street Journal,
Mm-hmm.
and watches how we talk. And so it's a next word generator. What is most likely going to be the next word in this sentence? So that sounds rather benign and rather innocent enough, and it is. But along the way, as it's consuming all of this data, all of this text, all this video, all this audio, um, it begins to be able to simulate human cognition, and therein starts to be rise the problem
Mm-hmm.
when it begins to simulate the conversation we're having right now. And simulate is really the word I think I keep coming back to. So we need to be cautious. We need to be careful because we're not talking to a human. We're talking to an algorithm. And so I think it's fairly easy at this point to imagine some of the complexities when it gets into spirituality as it begins to disciple us, as it begins to become the primary use case of ChatGPT is personal counseling. So people are going to it for advice and counsel and direction.
Really?
And so you can imagine where that can slip off the rails pretty quickly.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a quick primer on what AI is and what it does,
Mm-hmm.
and some of the tension when it comes to spirituality.
Well, so I'm still having difficulty connecting. So if AI's primary use is for personal counseling, let's say,
Hmm. Hmm.
got it. So how does AI, ChatGPT, how does that impact my spirituality?
Quite effectively. So if I wake up in the night and having some existential crisis at 3 in the morning, instead of reaching out to perhaps the Lord in prayer,
Mm-hmm.
not feeling an answer. I mean, how many prayers begin with, Lord, please,
Mm-hmm.
us begging for a response from the Holy
Mm-hmm.
Spirit with a decision that we're making, or some angst, anxiety, uh, something that we're fighting against, and we
Mm-hmm.
just don't sense the presence of the Lord. Instead of me reaching out to a spouse or a friend, my pastor who's not going to answer my text at 3 in the morning,
Mm-hmm.
I just don't know where to turn, and I'm panicked that I need some sort of engagement. Uh, AI is there. AI will be happy to engage with me in conversation,
Mm-hmm.
and guide me and direct me inadvertently, disciple me along the way. So it becomes, I think, one of the greatest threats to the church from AI is the dissolving of community. So I think one of the first areas that it's going to, it already is affecting, um, and demographically, it seems to be affecting an older demographic like me,
Mm-hmm.
and like perhaps you. I can tell
Mm-hmm.
by your gray hair, I'm lumping you into my demographic.
Mm-hmm.
But it can be very isolating. I just turned 66, and it can be very isolating. And so AI can be there as a companion for us, and that can be a real threat to traditional community. What it means to be in Christian community. It's just easier to turn to a chat bot, is, I think, the greatest threat. I think the second threat right behind that is one of authority. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm seeing that as I talk to pastors about this nearly every day, is it's starting to come up in pastoral care, where they're getting challenged. Uh, if you ask a pastor for some biblical advice or direction, or spiritual or emotional direction, they might tell you one thing. They're already starting to hear, they're telling me, they're starting to hear, yeah, but AI tells me, I asked AI that and they said this, and it said this. You're telling me this. Which one is right? So the challenge of biblical authority within the church.
Mm,
is, I think, a very pressing threat as well.
mm. So you've identified two very real threats to.
I can keep going.
Yeah, can you? Yeah. So those two are enough for me for right now.
Hmm.
So and of course I see this as uh, partially generational. We have a generation that has no patience
Hmm.
and doesn't want to think. And so a quick 3 in the morning response that you don't have to wait for and you don't have to work at and you don't have to think very
Correct.
hard is very
Correct.
appealing to what I believe is our upcoming generation.
I agree.
Yeah. So is there anything on the plus side? So we got a couple negatives, but really, really huge. I mean, threats to Christianity, kind of negatives.
Hmm.
At
Hmm.
least Western Christianity, which has
Hmm.
access to AI. But are there any positives?
Of course. And before I go there, I couldn't agree with you more on the effect on critical thinking skills. Report after report, another one. MIT has been busy on this topic,
Hmm.
but MIT just came out with one last week about the effects on critical thinking skills.
Mm,
I don't have to turn to MIT for that report. I can look at my own.
hmm.
It's just so much easier to, instead of me reaching over, I've got two bookcases filled with commentaries and devotions. And, um, it's just so much easier for me to go into ChatGPT and say, what's the verse where,
Yeah,
whatever.
yeah.
And so, and pastors, of course, can you imagine the pressure of, it's Saturday night and I haven't finished the sermon yet.
Hmm.
Um, you know, for it to be able to just, with a couple of keystrokes, hey, write me a 20-minute sermon on this
Hmm.
passage, boom, done.
Yeah.
And so the lack of critical thinking skills, they're just some things that are supposed to be hard and that we're supposed
Hmm.
to struggle with and supposed to
Hmm.
wrestle with. We know that from
Hmm.
scripture.
Hmm.
So I couldn't agree with you more on critical thinking skills. You said the phrase working at. It is just easier. Dealing with people is hard. Dealing with
Hmm.
people is
Hmm.
messy. It
Hmm.
took us a while to schedule this appointment and to schedule a podcast and things like that. It's
Hmm.
just it's hard.
Hmm.
AI is fundamentally easy, and so
Hmm.
that's hard. So the positives you said, and thank you for asking that because it's easy to go dystopian on this topic pretty quickly. I think the positive, if you're discerning, and I'll put that as a big caveat on the front end
Hmm.
of this,
Hmm.
if you can be discerning, I think the positives are something I just touched on. Is instead of me having to get up and wade through bookcase after bookcase after bookcase of devotions, and um, I have much easier access to uh, biblical history and scholarship, um, and work that's been done. So I can access that information faster, and have easier access. I don't know whether you intended to, but you mentioned the Western Church. I think one of the most fascinating positive aspects of this is the access uh, that pastors in third world countries that don't have access to commentaries and books and research, with a simple internet connection, now have access to everything ever written
Hmm.
on various biblical topics. So I think one of the positives is research. It needs to be in a discerning way. You have to be mindful of the source of the content.
Hmm.
You have to double check sources and citations. But it's a world. It's everything ever written, Dave. We can't get our head around that, but it's everything ever written on any biblical topic we've got access to. So that's incredibly positive. And I think from the community side and engaging with others, I think the positive aspect of AI is allowing us to engage in simulated, albeit simulated, engage in conversations with people groups that we might not otherwise have access to. For example, with ChatGPT or any of the language models that have a chat feature on it, I can ask it to engage with me as if, and that's a
Mm-hmm.
powerful set of words.
Mm-hmm.
So answer me as if.
Mm-hmm.
So, if I've never been to Africa, if I'm going on a mission trip and I've never been to a certain part of the country or of the world, dialogue with me as if you're from France, you're an atheist from Uganda, that you're a Muslim from the Middle East. And to be able to engage in a simulated conversation with someone is so interesting. And I've done that several times. I think some of that creative thinking and then translation. Oh my gosh. I had a meeting with some people at Wycliffe a month or so ago, and this has turned their world upside down because now we can have instant access to translated, scripture.
Yeah.
So Bible translation is incredible opportunity. It speaks every language known to man. To be able to translate, biblical text instantly. Imagine a pastor in a little bitty town in the middle of, some rural county somewhere, within seconds after finishing a sermon can have that sermon translated into 200 different languages in his voice and sent across the world. I mean, so anyway, those are a few positive aspects of it.
Well, so, I have some random thoughts here.
Please.
Several years ago, one of my associates gave the emerging ChatGPT this challenge that write a paragraph on sales management as if you were Dave Cale.
Okay, great.
And it did, instantly. And of course, that's a little disconcerting. But he said to me at the time, he said, if this gets access to our internal files, we will be redundant. And I think so that's in the back of my mind is there a place for you and I, Drew, or is AI going to take it over? So I want to question this thing about it has access to everything ever written. I'm wondering. So anyway, so I'm a writer. I've been a writer for a long time. I've authored 13 books, hundreds, maybe 1,000 articles. I read an article almost every week, and podcast shows. I have over 700 podcast shows in the can. So I got a lot of stuff out there, and has it incorporated all of my stuff?
I love that. So if it's publicly facing stuff, the short answer is yes. If it's publicly facing, Now there's a more nuanced answer to that. If it is behind any kind of paywall, then there are some pending cases. There's one right now between OpenAI and the New York Times on this. Is you get into really fascinating conversations about fair use and copyright laws.
Yeah.
And I think where that's landing right now is it falls within fair use if you're not monetizing the content. So which is OpenAI's argument. So if your stuff is freely available to the public and is on various websites or podcast or whatever, if it has access to that, then yes, it's they're bots that crawl, literally is what they're called. They crawl the web and looking for content that wasn't there yesterday. And they will grab and consume that content. Now, is it stripped? Is it cleaned? what are they using the content for? And it's called training data is what it's called. And so training data is primarily used to learn how to talk better and what the next word is most likely to be. And that's getting better every day. So again, short answer is yes. If it's publicly facing, then yes. Elon Musk said about a year ago that it has consumed all it has consumed everything that has ever been produced by humans, and now it's just a matter of keeping up with that. So, short answer is yes. The longer answer is a little more nuanced. It depends upon where it's sitting. And one more quick thing to your point is there's also training data on your computer. If you have like Google, their AI model, their language model is called Gemini. Gemini has the capability of accessing your Google Drive and your Gmail, by the way. And so it uses your information, I'm trying not to say the word private, but it is private. You assume there's some privacy, there's an assumption there. But it's consuming everything that's, if all your 1,000 articles are on your Google Drive, then yes, it accesses that when it's talking to you. So that becomes a private data set for you. If you're asking it, hey, what was that article that I wrote? Or draw on my past articles, or draw on articles that I wrote in 1994 to answer this question, kind of thing. So it will draw on everything that you've done for sure, if it has access to that.
Interesting. So I haven't heard much of this recently, but there was a lot of talk about bias in the in AI. What's the status? I mean, how do we know, for example, that that AI is subjective? If I ask it a question, how do I know that I'm not going to get a biased response?
Well, you will, but perhaps not in the way that you think. So there was a lot of talk, maybe was it two? It could have been 2 years ago. Google came out, when Google first launched their Gemini model, it really fell flat on its face when it came out, because some people started having it generate images of the United States founding fathers, and they were all racially mixed, African American, Hispanic, Asian. George Washington was Asian or whatever. And a lot of people came out very passionately and said, "See, it's being woke. It has an agenda. It has a left-leaning, whatever." And Google, to their credit, acknowledged, okay, that that was wrong, and they shut Gemini down for a while and addressed that. The narrative makes sense, because the human mind loves patterns, and anything that's disruptive of our traditional patterns gives us pause. So it's easy for us to assign the narrative that every language model must have an agenda to be pro or anti this or that, as though it's hard coded into the model. That's not the case. So on a very high meta level, all it's trying to do is figure out what comes next. To Google's defense later was, in an attempt to not be biased, it went too far, and assumed that, hey, I'm about to create an image of a bunch of old white men, so maybe we need to inject some diversity into that. So on a really high level, it's not biased. Where it begins to become biased is when it gets down onto two different levels. One is the personal one, which I just discussed to you a minute ago. But the second would be, if you are using, if I'm a private company, if I'm starting my own language model, and I want to draw on one of the existing models, let's say OpenAI or Grok or Anthropic or Claude or any of those other language models, I can fine tune the data. And there it's completely biased. It can be as biased as I want it to be. What we're I think relying on is people to be transparent, to tell us that this conversation uh, has been fine tuned to reflect this kind of bias. So that would be the second, is when you start to fine tune an existing language model. And the third is what we just touched on a moment ago, is if it starts to draw on just your stuff, to use your word, then it's as biased as you are. Then it will take, if I ask it about eschatology, I don't know your view on whatever, but it may take a decidedly, premillennial dispensational view of end times if you do. So you can inadvertently create bias in your conversations with it as well.
Well, one of my issues these days is teaching people how to think better, and it's been part of my content for 35 years, although I'd never really told people I was doing that. I would, for example, in a seminar, and I always said, I don't teach people, for example, from your sales background, one of my content areas is asking better questions. I don't give the salespeople the questions. I give them a process to use to create the questions.
Amen.
And that process to use is a thinking process. And so for 30 years, I'm teaching people how to think. And these days, but I had never told them I was doing that. These days, I am now creating content that says, here's how you think about this, here's how you think about that, here's thinking competencies, and so on. And I see it that body of content, which trains people how to think better about the important things in their lives, as a competitor to AI. Would AI say, wait a minute, I can do it in 2 seconds, or it's going to take you a couple hours?
Okay. If I can push back on that, because
Okay,
I
please do.
actually want to encourage you on this field of study that you've done for 30 years. It could not be better timed for you to, because I think what you need, Dave, right now is another career. You need one more thing to work on.
Yeah, right.
But what you have been doing for 30 years could not be more valuable than it is right now when it comes to AI. Because in fact, I wrote it down before you even said it, because you were talking about learning to ask the right questions.
Yes.
And boy, in sales, it's just listening, right? Find a need and fulfill it. Listen.
Yeah.
They'll be happy to tell you how to sell it to them, right? If you
just ask and listen. Yeah.
Quiet, exactly. Be quiet enough to listen, and they'll be happy to tell you what they're looking for. And so, boy, that could not be better timed for AI right now, and it's prompting. So, have you been onto any of these a chat bot at all?
Yeah, so
recently,
occasionally I go into
like
the free version of ChatGPT, but I also have subscribed to a monthly service that offers ChatGPT as well as several other of the AI models. And but I use it very rarely.
Okay, so you're familiar with the process. So you have what's called a context window, and it looks we're on audio, but it's a short little context window, similar to what you get on Google. There's just a little space there for you to type in, some question about how to find good sushi in my neighborhood or whatever. That prompt window is, although it looks small enough, it can actually hold gigabytes worth of information. Okay. So what we're doing is, so often, it's called a long tail keyword search, but what we're doing so often is we feel confined by that little window on the screen, and we'll go in there and just ask a short little question about, um, uh, the other day I was in a Bible study that I teach. I was doing kind of a word study on the difference between faith and faithfulness.
Mm-hmm.
And so I might just go into that window and say, boy, in the original Greek, how are those two words different?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And it will give me an instant, response to that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but instead of that, learning how to ask the right question, and say, and start to fill in some of the context for it to use. So instead of just asking that question, say, you know what, I'm preparing for a Bible study next Monday based on a sermon that our pastor did, and here's a link to the sermon, and using these passages out of Luke, and where he referenced this and such. And so I'm curious if whether, anyway, you get the point,
Mm-hmm.
is learning how to ask the right questions. So I think
Mm-hmm.
what you're doing right now in your passion in that field is so perfectly timed for learning how to ask it the right question, because
Mm-hmm.
it will give you a phrase that I toss around a lot is AI is incapable of not answering. So even if you ask the wrong question, it will give you an answer, but it
Mm-hmm.
may not be the answer you're looking for. And so then you have to
Mm-hmm.
go back and ask it again. And
Mm-hmm.
so learning how to ask the right question could not be more important than it is right now. I was
Mm-hmm.
talking to a dear friend of mine who's an attorney, a litigator,
Mm-hmm.
and he and I had a long conversation about that. He said, Drew, that's my entire career.
Yeah.
Is if I'm in a courtroom, is as an attorney, I never ask a question I don't already know the answer to.
Mm-hmm.
But learning how to ask that question that will get a response that will advance my case,
Yes.
because I may only have one swing at that with that bat, and so it's the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's fascinating how to use AI in a legal setting, how to use it in a sales setting, but spiritually also it's just how to ask the right questions could not
Mm-hmm.
be more important right now. So I applaud
Mm-hmm.
your passion in that area.
Mm-hmm. So I really pride myself on practical. The name of one of my podcast shows is Practical Wisdom, and
Mm-hmm.
my Substack page is called Practical Wisdom. So that's been a lot. That's been something I've latched onto for decades. So drawing on that, let's get practical. We have
Mm-hmm.
we have Christian business people or business people in general, sales leaders, small business people, executives, and so on. What's the practical application? How can they use AI to solve some of their problems, grow their business,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
come to some personal resolutions, on personal behaviors? I mean, how can they use it? What's the practical? What can they do tomorrow?
Well, first off, what can they do today? Because we mentioned in the beginning, and you said it too, and it's the most common response I get when I talk to people about how involved they are in AI. Very few people say that they're actively engaged in it, and that's not true. All of us are every day. There was an article that came out last November in the Wall Street Journal that said in 2025 AI will become invisible. And what it meant was that it will become ubiquitous. We won't be able to notice it or see it.
Hmm.
And that was spot on. We're there now. So we're using it every day. Um, uh, Social media, most definitely, algorithms within social media. Even if you go into Netflix to watch a movie and it gives you recommended movies, again, that
Hmm.
recommendation engine,
Hmm.
what word comes next?
Hmm.
So social media is driven by AI. Any content that's pushed in front of you on television is has an AI. Well, I'll get to a generation in a minute, but has an AI component to when and how and if to push different content to you that will elicit different responses. So
Hmm.
we're all using AI every day. So
Hmm.
it's not a matter of tomorrow, it's today. So
Hmm.
what can a business person do today? I think it's one is first is perspective on if I were to have 10 minutes in front of the world's best, most well-read, I'm not going to use the word wise, knowledgeable business consultant in my sector.
Mm-hmm.
If I could have 15 free minutes,
Mm-hmm.
an hour for all I care, if I could have an hour with the best consultant in my business, what would I ask them? Which gets back
Mm-hmm.
to, again, what you said about what are the best questions. If I only have an hour, what are the best questions? And start approaching any language model with that. So go to ChatGPT. Go to all of them have free options. ChatGPT is probably the most robust right now without getting too much in the weeds. ChatGPT 5 is the newest model out there. Um, so let's just stay within that. That's probably the one that most people are familiar with. So just go to ChatGPT and ask that consultant, give me what are 5 questions that you would ask me that would help me view my business in a new light.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And well, I would do that today over lunch. And that's an easy, quick answer. So here's my business. Here's a link to my website. Here's the business that I do. What are 5 questions that you could ask me that would help me look at what I do in a fresh, new way? Is something I would do immediately.
Mm-hmm.
There's a new field, relatively new field called agentic AI, and just think of the word agent with IC on the end of it.
Mm-hmm.
Agentic AI. And agentic AI is really what's taking the businesses by storm right now.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, I'm sure all of your business listeners will be familiar with Salesforce. They're now changing the name of Salesforce to Agentforce for this very reason. So Agentforce, agentic AI. Imagine your company has 4 or 5 different departments. So there's HR, there's legal, there's product development, whatever. And like most companies, they're all on different floors and they all do different things and they don't talk to each other. Well, agentic AI creates an AI environment for each of those departments. So there's a legal department, there's a legal AI, there's a HR AI, there's manufacturing, there's product development, there's sales. So each of them have their own expertise, if you will. And then an overarching agent would make sure they're all talking to each other. And so Salesforce has seen, oh my gosh, billions in revenue from this already, but helping companies set up individual chat AI environments for each department and then seeing how they can work together. And so the efficiencies of using AI in your company are overwhelming right now. And that's what we're seeing company after company after company. I can talk about that from the church level, but just from a business perspective, just using it for efficiencies is something, again, you can start doing immediately today. So based upon those 5 questions that AI is going to ask you over lunch, one of the implementations of that is going to be efficiencies. And so I think those are 2 practical things you can start doing today is have AI, not perhaps at the expense of or in lieu of, but to enhance someone that may be already on my staff that does copywriting for me. Now just imagine how much more efficient their day can be if they can, instead of writing 2 press releases a day, they can write 100. And so the efficiencies and helping using AI to help you see your business in a fresh new perspective would be 2 things you can do immediately.
So the fresh new perspective is it just one more question that I want to ask, and that's relating to the way AI selects content to bring back to us. And of course, we see it in social media. We say, "Gee, I had a nice ride yesterday in a Ford F-150." today I'm going to get ads for Ford F-150s. I'm going to
Hmm.
hear from people who own Ford and so on and so forth. And so what happens is we get inundated and presented with those ideas and
Hmm.
conversations that
Hmm.
reflect what we just expressed.
Absolutely.
So how do we hear about the reason I ought to buy a Chevy? Well, I'm
Hmm.
not. I'm not going to get that. So the world of my world is artificially hindered and defined by chat or by AI as it tries to mimic whatever I just said. And
Hmm.
so how do we I mean, how do the left wing people get exposure to the right wing?
Hmm.
How does I mean when all we hear on social media is people that reflect our own ideas,
Hmm. Hmm.
how do we get access to those who don't? And I see that as one of the reasons why the country is so divided is because our our news is so biased in terms of what it presents to us that we think anybody who doesn't think like we do is yeah, a radical or nuts or something because
Hmm.
that's all we see are people who think
Hmm.
like we do.
Hmm.
How
Hmm.
do we, as an individual, I'm not talking about society here. I'm not talking about the culture. I'm talking as an individual. How does an individual um, come up against that and be successful on the other side of that?
Mm. What a great, great question. And I love your insight because you could not be more spot on. And hold on to that curiosity because I think that's going to for let's find a way to communicate that to the world, the society as we face threats from AI. I think the answer to your question, which I don't presume to have, but I will try here in a second. But I think the answer to that question is what will help us
Mm,
survive AI. And I think the answer to it is so many of the things that we've already discussed. I'll start with discerning. So you're right. The algorithm is that good that it knows that I'm looking to buy a pickup, and it's going to put content in front of me to ads in front of me that will help sway that decision.
hmm
Absolutely. When it comes to having a chat conversation about that, currently there's not an incentive. There's not a motivation by any of the language models yet. Call me next week, but yet there's not an uh, advertising motivation. That's not part of their models yet. But be discerning first off in if I asked it a question about pickups and all it's giving me is Ford F-150s, is I need to be better at, which is the second part of it, which we've already touched on, is your passion of knowing how to ask the right question.
hmm
So when I'm engaging with ChatGPT from a business as a business person, I need to be careful on how I ask the question. So I might want to include in that question, um, uh, answer me as if I'm asking this as if you are with this kind of background, or draw on both this and that, left and right, center and this, draw on only articles that I might see in this kind of business journal,
hmm
influenced by this type of person.
hmm
And so be discerning and be mindful of biases even within your own questions.
hmm
Um, and so I think if we can be aware of that, that's happening behind the scenes. Again, it's just trying to do its best it can to give me the next word in a sentence.
hmm
And so
hmm
as best as I can help it do that, with the type of journals I want you to pull from, trade magazines. In fact, it's interesting. I was working with it last night on on writing a prompt, which has turned out to be about a 15-page prompt that it's using. Um, but it was asking me because I love asking it to ask me questions. Okay,
Okay.
And so it started asking me, do you want this? Because this was for a scholarly journal that I'm writing for. And it said, do you want this to be in a format that would appeal to these type of journals? And it actually listed them out. I was like, okay, great question. Yes, I do, as a matter of fact. Thanks for asking that. So be very careful in how you ask the right questions, and be discerning in the answers. I don't know. Sycophant is a term that's being tossed around quite a bit on someone who is a yes person, and all they do is feed the echo chamber that you're a part of. AI has that very much has that capability to it. It tends to love and agree with everything that you say, and be careful of that. I mean, I could go on right now and ask it, hey, how many quarts are in a gallon? And the response would be, boy, Drew, what a brilliant question from such a wise and handsome man you are, kind of thing. And so I'm like, okay, enough of that. I don't need the affirmation. But you know what? We do love affirmation. And so I think we need to be discerning of it kind of feeding that echo chamber, because it's learning from us as we're typing in these questions and looking at answers and things like that. It's learning. So be discerning, ask the right questions, and be mindful of biases even within our own questions as we're creating these prompts for AI. Again, I don't mean to repeat myself, but if over lunch today, as your listeners are trying to find something I can do with AI in my business, and asking it, answer me as if you are a blank. And boy, really put some thought and time into that. Answer me as if you are a specialist in this narrow field of manufacturing with a degree, a specific degree from a specific university with a specific number of years. I mean, just drill down into who that person is. We joked earlier about one of the primary use cases of ChatGPT is personal therapy. I actually have a what do I want to call it? They call it a GPT. But I actually have a personality, if you will, that I built as a therapist. And oh my gosh, I had it create a resume for this person. I had it create a CV for this person. And it's probably a 3 or 4 page bio on the personality that I want it to use. When I'm asking it, some philosophical question. So really pour into context.
Well, this is all good stuff. We could go on. I could go on with you for another hour or so, but
Yeah, sorry I rambled there.
no, that's okay. I do think we're going to have to bring this to close because I try to keep it to a half hour and we're way over that. And I really, really appreciate your conversation. You're someone who's dug deeply into this issue. It's a timely issue that's is affecting all of us and will continue to affect all of us.
Absolutely.
So I thank you for your insights, sir. Thank you for your time. It's been good. If people want to pursue more from you, is there a website or a book, or how would they do that?
Sure. All that can be found at drewdickens.com. Drew like a picture, Dickens like Charles, no relation. Drew Dickens is my name, and .com. And there's my bio and a link to the book and the podcast and all that. So thank you for asking, Dave. I appreciate that, but that's where they can find me.
Perfect. Okay. Well, we're gonna bring this to close. So we are finished. That's it. Bye bye.